bit overwhelmed. I'm not sure he's talking about me. Anyway, Donna Bonney. I'm not sure whether Susan Ricks is here, Deputy Chair Martyr Board, members of the Martyr Group Executive, and all significant people in the Martyr family, good morning. When Ben invited me to be with you this morning, I said yes before he had time to change his mind. Every connection with the Martyr is special to me, and I use every occasion I can of being here. For those of you who have never heard of me, but Mark has mentioned a bit, I should give you a bit of my background. To begin, I can say with certainty I'm the oldest person in this room. And the reason, and it's not my fault, is because I was born in 1925 and in Ireland. There were 9 in our family. We grew up on a small farm of 53 acres, very different from what happens in Australia. Slightly larger than the usual farm for that time, a farm that provided us with most of the food we needed. There were cows and calves, pigs, hens, chickens, geese, and a hard-working horse we all loved and cried over when he died of rheumatism at a very old age. When milking the cows, my mother, who had a good voice, always sang. She believed it relaxed the cows and they gave more milk. On coming home from school each afternoon, we all helped with the farming. Family nightly prayer, including the rosary, was routine. A well-known Irish priest, Father Peyton, used to say that the family that prays together stays together. I believe that. In June 1947, along with 9 other sisters who were also giving their lives to God, and following a tedious 5-week-long voyage on a troop ship, I arrived in Brisbane ready to do whatever I was asked to do. I recall having pointed out to me the 2 significant buildings in Brisbane at the time. That was the City Hall and the Custom House, still significant buildings. But we didn't have the high-rises. Within 2 weeks of my arrival, I was teaching grade 2 children, 42 of them at St. Joseph's School, Kangaroo Point. I remember their happy, trusting little faces looking up at me. They were a delight to be with and to teach, and I thought, well, this is what all Australian children look like, and this is what they'll be like, no problem. So, very soon I was told that the inspector would be coming, that he would examine the children on all the subjects, but that he was very particular that grade 2 children knew Roman numerals up to 12. And he also wanted to know where did the Roman numerals, where did they come from? So with my brilliant career in teaching at stake, I set to making sure they knew their Roman numerals well and telling them where Rome was. And I'm sure that for emphasis I would have said the Pope lives in Rome. But anyway, we were well prepared. The inspector came, he examined the children on subjects, and then he went on to the Roman numerals. Well, they were wonderful. They knew it very well. And he said, I can't fool you. No, sir. You know it very well. You said, yes, sir. And they were jumping up in the seats. He was a lovely man. He had eating out of his hand. And I thought, we're great. I'm great. I'm a great teacher. Look, listen to them. And then he said, Roman numerals, where did that all come from? Every hand went up and they said, from Ireland, sir. And look, even back in 1947, mass murder was against the law, but I thought about it. And I looked at the inspector, and he was grinning from ear to ear. He'd done what he'd set out to do. But at the end of 6 months teaching, without warning, and along with 6 other school sisters, off to the Martyr I was sent to train as a nurse. I wonder if Roman numerals had anything to do with that decision. And anyway, the prospect terrified me, but I went there, hoping I'd be such a failure that I'd be sent back teaching. No such luck. There followed many years of nursing, including spending several years in the operating theatres. We young sisters saw and learned from the older sisters. I think we thought they were very old. I suppose they were 50 or 60 years of age. And we saw the love and personal care they gave every patient and their relatives. It wasn't just a job they were engaged in. They really wanted to look after each person as if they were caring for Christ himself. Today, each one of you isn't just doing a job. Regardless of what you do or where you are making possible the delivery of exceptional care to all who need it. The routine of my life ended, as Mark talked about, when I was told I was to be administrator of the Martyr hospitals. Not prepared by experience or academic study for such a role, I protested, even calling on a higher authority by declaring this was carrying the will of God too far. But nothing worked. January 1966, and I went to the office allocated to me. It was on the 3rd floor of what is now the Duncan building. However, there was nothing for me to do. no job description, and nobody to tell me what I was expected to do. I found that the person who took decisions, approved purchases, made non-medical appointments, and so on, was the accountant. There was a senior doctor, but it amazed me to discover that these two never sat down to discuss and make plans. They didn't see the need. I was more alarmed to find there was no expectation that I had any significant role to play. I moved around the hospitals, I was welcomed, and I visited departments, particularly when there was a gathering, say, at morning tea time, when I could hear what people were needing and talking about, and I also got a cup of tea. Surprisingly, there were only 2 occasions when people met to discuss hospital matters: the monthly board meeting and the medical staff committee, which reported directly to the board. I attended board meetings, but I had no contribution to make. I just sat there. I didn't know anything. Perhaps some of you may long for those days, no meetings to attend, but I wouldn't recommend it. Some years earlier, I'd completed a diploma in nursing administration. During that study, the subject of management fascinated me, particularly the opportunity that successful management had of keeping everyone informed on whatever was happening. I persuaded the doctor and the accountant that we meet once a week. Anyway, because I knew so little about the operations of the hospital, I found it difficult to manufacture an agenda for each meeting. It was not that my 2 companions didn't want to be accommodating, but they couldn't see any reason for sitting down and wasting time. When I suggested we have a senior nursing representative on our executive group, the reaction was extraordinary. I remember it well. Why would you want that? Nurses do just what the doctor tells them to do. I don't want to riot here. I didn't say that. The message coming to me was, why keep changing what is working well? At this stage, I have one plea: be kind to those endeavoring to implement change. It takes time, effort, patience, and a lot of skill to effect the changes that an organization that hopes to be relevant must constantly undertake. From the outset, I was painfully aware of my lack of academic preparation for the task given me. I had enrolled at university, was working full-time, attending classes 4 nights a week, and getting up at 4 in the morning to do assignments. The good thing about all this was that I found mature age study to be exhilarating. You bring your life and work experiences to bear on all you hear and read. I loved study and I enjoyed exams, probably because I needed both so much. I needed everything. I recommend mature age study, and you're hearing about it today. Our executive meetings continued, but it was almost impossible to make sure that heads of departments were kept fully informed of any developments. And more seriously, we had little means of knowing their needs and expectations or their ideas. There was no organizational structure to facilitate this. I knew that nothing would be achieved by imposing changes from the top down, unless it was preceded by adequate preparation and involvement of everyone who would be affected by it. I broached the subject to the executive, suggesting that we needed to engage in management training for ourselves and for heads of departments across the entire complex. The response was negative. The accountant advising me, he knew all about management, having studied it 25 years earlier when he did accountancy. I knew then that I was in trouble. I wish I had known then of the famous John Cotter, a professor at Harvard University, a man recognized as a world-famous change expert, who in his book Leading Change spells out 8 precise steps if effective change is to be achieved. In summary, these steps may be reduced to 3: a compelling reason for change, a clear vision for the future, and a coherent plan for getting there. When I look at these steps now and compare them with what we attempted to do in the 60s, I can see that we definitely had a compelling reason for change, no doubt about that. But we lacked clarity on what the future might be, and our plans to implement steps to lead us forward were often uncertain. However, we struggled on. It's highly unlikely I will ever, at this hour of my life, hold a leadership position again, but I still read anything I can find on leadership. I don't think any one of us ever reaches the pinnacle of successful leadership, but that doesn't stop us from thinking and dreaming about it. I found comfort in a book by Canadian Michael Fullan, Nuanced Leadership, published in March this year. He talks of 3 areas significant for leaders. Each one of you here is a leader, or you wouldn't be here. The first is joint determination, flushing out all the facts, all the opinions, because as a leader, you won't be measured on whether you made a good decision, but you'll be measured on whether it was a good thing that you did, that you involved everybody. Let the group be the foundation for success. And not that it was your own idea, but that you involved people. And the second is adaptability, which is a deeper facet of joint determination. It relates to the ability of leaders to change their minds when a strategy isn't working and to go back to the group to test solutions not yet tried. Michael Fullan says, nuanced leaders never become settled experts because they are always learning. I can imagine there'll be nods of approval about that around the room. The third area of significance for leaders is what the author calls culture-based accountability. He defines it as individual and collective responsibility that becomes embedded into the values, behavior, and actions of people. For us at the Mater, we can resonate with this. Our respect for and adherence to the values we espouse represent the culture that is unique to us, well expressed in our values statement, which reads, together, the 5 Mater values, we know them: mercy, dignity, care, commitment, quality, underpin our relationships with one another, assist us in our decision-making, and shape our workplace culture. At Mater, our values are reflected in all that we do and are visible to all through the way in which we behave and interact with one another. Patients and visitors have often said to me, I meet them as I'm going around the hospital, they say to me, make this intuitive remark, Mater staff like one another. Isn't that a wonderful thing to hear from outside people? Mater staff like one another. I think Michael Fullan would agree with how we function. Now back again to the 60s and 70s. There were about 120 Sisters of Mercy working in the 4 hospitals. There were nurses, cooks, office workers, laboratory technologists, pharmacists, radiographers, and a photographer. These sisters were strong women who retained their own personalities, and many stories are told about them. I'll tell you one. There was a patient who was unhappy with a doctor, and she switched over to, I remember the name well, a Dr. McKillop. And Dr. McKillop saw the lady and admitted her to the Mater Private, now Albany Place. Now, the first doctor came in one morning to the private, and he met Sister Mary Edmund. Now, you wouldn't meddle with Sister Mary Edmund, tell you. I knew her. He said, how is Mrs. So-and-so this morning? And she said, she's dead, doctor. And he said, oh, what does my fine Dr. McKillop think about that now? And she said, he thinks she's dead too, and walked on. The sisters, for the most part, had little interest in administrative matters. It wasn't their concern. They gave their whole hearts to what they were doing and worked incredibly long hours. There must be Mater people today who feel as these sisters did. They work hard at their task and go home to face what may be another hard day's work, whatever they've got to do at home with family and so on. Unless they understand the reason behind it, they may find it difficult to adjust to or even be interested in change. As you well know, resistance to change can also come from not being part of the journey that initiated the change, from not having clear lines of communication, or from a sense they are not being heard. It was clear to me that some form of organizational structure needed to be put in place, but how to go about it, how to achieve it, occupied a great part of my day and even sometimes into the night. At university, I came to know and appreciate the man who taught leadership and management. I talked to him of our situation, suggesting he could help us, but also advising him that if he were to become involved, not everyone would make him welcome. He was ready for the challenge. We talked about it, and I plotted with people within the hospitals who wanted change. Gradually, a low-key, unofficial discussion commenced within the campus on what we rather grandly called a management development program. On one memorable day, and for the first time in the Mater's history, all heads and senior people of departments from across the campus met together in the one room. I was nervous. What saved the day was the opening comment by the lecturer. If there is anything wrong with an organization, look to the top. That satisfied the most unwilling of the participants. It wasn't their fault that things were going bad. As for myself, I was very happy to accept blame for what seemed to be some in the room to be unnecessary interference with what they perceived to be proven and smooth workings of the hospitals to date. I must add, however, that the vast majority of the people in that room were excited and enthusiastic with what was presented. Because we were determined to keep everyone involved, progress was very slow. From memory, I think it took us over 12 months before we had established what we called a governance and management structure. But when it was in place, most people understood it. It served us well, but only for a few years. That won't surprise any of you. We were growing and we were changing. No worthwhile organization remains static, particularly in its structure. Here I'd like to insert something I believe to be critically important to the smooth running of any organization. It relates to the need for observance of the established lines of communication. From time to time, differences between a member of a unit and the head of the unit will arise. It can be soul-destroying for the head of the unit to be bypassed by a team member and, without being aware of it, have a matter referred to a higher authority, and then to hear about it from the higher authority. There may well be occasions, of course, when a matter needs to be referred on, but desirably this takes place following a discussion between the parties involved. Should agreement not be reached there, either person can declare that this matter needs to be referred on and that he or she will refer it on. Take the responsibility there and express the honesty of it. More serious, I think, would be the situation should a senior member of an organization bypass a recognized head of a section to begin negotiations with a junior member of that person's area of responsibility and authority. Should this occur, it would be destructive of good relationships, quality of services, would create a lot of unease, and if continued, could harm even the very culture of the organization. Occasionally, I've said to me, the matter isn't the same as it was when the Sisters of Mercy were here. My answer to that is a very pious and earnest, thank God. We are not a ministry that is stuck in the past. The Martyr mission statement, to which I will refer later, makes this clear. The professionalism, anyway, and the personal quality of care provided in our hospitals and the culture of warmth and friendliness that existed between and among those who provided care made us popular among those patients and doctors. Demands on our services increased to the point where our physical facilities were unable to cope, also frequently in severe financial difficulties. There were also major hurdles to our efforts to transform the Mater from being somewhat, very much inconsequential in the wider hospital sphere to becoming significant in medical, teaching, nursing, and research arenas. Success did not arrive overnight. These feats were accomplished largely by my successors, and some of them were very, very successful in moving this on. Government funding was illimited, inconsistent, and given grudgingly. Its officials often advised me that if only the government owned us, we'd never again be short of money. I was never impressed with that offer, never found it tempting. I recall one of the occasions when we were in severe financial straits in our children's hospital. Having made a submission for financial help, I was invited to come to the health department to speak to it. Following discussions, I was told, "Very well, sister, you can have the money this time, but don't come back again asking for more." In case you're wondering, I didn't go down that lift to Charlotte Street saying prayers. I didn't. But I did go back as often as legitimate needs of our patients and of those who cared for them demanded it. I should mention that throughout our lives, the sisters never received a wage or salary. The money that could have come to us went to the support of our 3 public hospitals. For me, to this very day, another major benefit of this practice is I've never had to prepare a tax return. You probably envy me. Life moved on apace, and so did our facilities and modes of treatment until today, thanks to successful leaders and committed and competent people like yourselves. Mater is now abreast of all that is expected of a modern-day hospital. We've come a long way, and our mission is unchanged. Let's have a look at our mission. In the spirit of the Sisters of Mercy, Mater offers compassionate service to the sick and needy, promotes an holistic approach to healthcare in response to changing community needs. We're ready for that, unmet need. And fosters high standards of health-related education and research. Following the example of Christ the Healer, we commit ourselves to offering these services without discrimination. By the way, there's a very pleasing statue of Christ the Healer. Some of you may have seen it. It's inside the door of the public hospital on Raymond Terrace. And underneath it is written, Christ the Healer, inspiration to all who serve the sick in the Mater hospitals. It's a very nice, simple statue. It's worth your while having a look at it sometime. Since our mission statement refers to Mater's response to changing community needs, I will mention 3 occasions when we reached out to unmet need. The first was back in the 80s, and you might have heard of it, when the AIDS crisis became a public issue. The Premier of the day stated that no one should help these people, and it was written in the Courier Mail, their illness is a direct punishment from God. Nobody reacted to this incredible statement, not even the medical profession. Through a series of circumstances, and as the public face of the Mater at the time, I became the unlikely person involved from the Sisters of Mercy and the Mater. However, I knew nothing of the virus, nothing of how it was and was not transmitted, and I wondered how I could be of help to men whom I had never met and about whose lifestyle and needs I knew nothing. As well as that, dressed as I am and as I was afraid that the men might think I'm coming down to preach to them something, because I was going to help them. They might want to preach to them. Once again, there was a steep learning curve, but it worked out all right. I got to talk to the men and they knew where I came from. In the community, fear of acquiring the virus through touching the clothes of a person with the virus was rampant. But our own Sister Mary Dorothea, who used to work in the Children's Hospital, nursed the men when they were dying. And there were hundreds of men that were very sick. They were extremely sick because they couldn't reveal their nature, their illness, so they couldn't get medication, they couldn't do anything. Dr. Joe McCormick, whom you may know, he said to me, get them to come to my medical outpatient clinic and I'll look after them there and I'll give them the medication they need. So they came, they sat among everybody else, nobody knew who they were, and we got looked after. That was just a small number, of course. One incident from those days, very dark days, remains with me. A man at Dutton Park was dying of AIDS, and a priest was going to say Mass at his bedside. On arriving at the bedside, I realized this man was dying. At the end of Mass, when the man had died, his partner threw himself across the bed in an absolute grief, profound grief. And I stood there and I realized, I looked at them and I thought, here are 2 men loved by God as much as each one of us is. I bent down, put my arms around him, raised him up and held him while he sobbed his heart out. And the strange outcome of all that was that at that moment, all my fear about not knowing how I could help these men all fell away. I realized it was all a matter of love. A second and remarkable venture is that which Dr. Glenn Gardner has pioneered at the Mater Mothers. In what is a first in Australia and unique to the Mater Mothers, Dr. Gardner, with the support of an extremely competent team, operates on unborn babies diagnosed as having the dreaded spina bifida condition. Surgery post-delivery is of little benefit. To date, Glenn has operated on 7 such babies and all are born perfectly well. We have reason to be proud of and grateful to this humble, skilled man, Dr. Glenn Gardner, and his incredible team. They're a wonderful group of people. The third endeavour, and also a very critical one, is yet to commence. It involves the development of a perinatal centre of excellence for women who suffer mental health issues during pregnancy and after birth even. You will be as shocked as I to hear that suicide is the leading cause of death of Australian women during pregnancy and within a year of birth. We've had suicides in Brisbane, a number of them. Of the 40,000 women that give birth in Queensland each year, an estimated 8,000 will experience some form of mental health issue. There is an urgent need to provide inpatient mental health accommodation where women and their babies can be nurtured, welcomed, and given the best possible specialised care. involvement of the father who may feel lost in this painful situation is also considered. You may or may not have heard the wonderful news that the Martyr Convent, where every martyr sister, including myself, spent many years, is to be repurposed to become Queensland's largest perinatal mental health centre to support such women and their babies. It warms our hearts to think that the loving purpose to which our home of many years is to be directed. The cost of redesigning this building that dates back to 1927 and is heritage listed is the enormous sum of $10 million. It was a simple place when we lived there, but if it becomes this thing, and it will become this centre, I've told them they have to get rid of the bell that relentlessly rang at 5:15 every morning, winter and summer, 5:15. I said, get rid of it, get rid of that bell, wherever it was. And anyway, through the untiring efforts of Nigel Harris and Leslie Ray from the Martyr Foundation, $5 million have already been raised. Nigel, Leslie and myself are actively involved in searching out anyone with money to spare to get this much needed work started. So would you join us in doing what we can so that through our combined efforts we'll see to it that this much needed and great service will soon be available. I shall end with a story. Many years ago, my sister Nuala and I were on holidays in Ireland. Our family took us to Mayo to see what is called the Celtic Furrow, a centre which traces cultural, historical and spiritual roots over 5,000 years, all graphically depicted. Then followed a walk through a meandering labyrinth that depicted 1,000 years